That's good ก็ปกตินะครับมิดอัพก็ประมาณ2 ใน 3อยู่แล้วเนาะเราก็จะมีกันประมาณ2 ใน 3วันนี้ก็จริงๆเป็นครั้งแรกของ Tech at Agoda นะครับก็วันนี้ยังเป็นสถานที่ชั่วคราวอยู่ก็เราจะมีสถานที่ที่ใหญ่ขึ้นกว่านี้รองรับคนได้มากกว่านี้แล้วก็จะมีหัวข้อที่น่าสนใจมากขึ้นเรื่อยๆนะครับโอเค for today we start the first Tech Pinup at Agoda and this is the first episode here. For now, it's not really a big place, but we are going to have a greater place soon. สำหรับพวกวันนี้มีใครบ้างที่ไม่ได้มาจาก Agoda ครับ Yeah.
Welcome.
And who is from Agoda? Yeah.
You should probably put your hand up anyway. If you don't understand, just put
สำหรับเซสชั่นเราไม่ต้องแปลกใจนะครับเราจะไทยปนอังกฤษปนไทยแต่ส่วนใหญ่จะมีทั้งอังกฤษและไทยไปด้วยก็ถ้าใครมีปัญหาหรือว่าอยากจะให้ฟังช้าๆลงให้พูดช้าๆลงบอกได้นะครับแต่อย่างหนึ่งที่อยากจะบอกเลยวันนี้เราไม่ได้เทคเรื่องเดียวนะเราได้ภาษาด้วยครูว่า โอเคครับก็ก่อนอื่นนะครับอยากจะให้รู้จักกับคนหนึ่งนะครับที่ทำให้เราสามารถที่จะมีมิตอัพครั้งนี้และครั้งต่อๆไปได้นะครับ First of all I would like to introduce one guy who allow us to create the great meetups here. Peter Coleman, our Director of Engineering.
Okay. Hi. Thanks, Max. So I'll just introduce myself and a little bit about who I work for, just to give some context to some of the things that we're talking about. So yeah, my name's Pete. I'm Director of Engineering at Agoda. I'm working here for 7 years. I came in as an engineer and sort of worked my way up. And I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about Agoda, the kind of things that what we do, the kind of problems that we face. Should we get the door? That Agoda, it's one of the bigger companies in the space. So we're talking about the 5th largest OTA in the world. What that means in terms of IT is that there's quite a lot of pressure in terms of the number of machines and the software that we have to build. So each day we're taking 5 million unique visitors that are coming to the site. And we need to build a technology that is going to be able to sustain that load and make sure that we can serve it accurately. Now to kind of put that into context, imagine at the moment we're considering a project to move the cookie data to the server side, right? So we want to give the client a 16-byte key, and then we will put all the client data on the server side. Now, so when we kind of look at the maths of that, we have 5 million unique visitors each day. 50% of those are new people. That means we have to create 2.5 million new keys every single day. Now, if we just imagine 1,024 bytes for the cookie data, that's a growth of 2.5 terabytes every single day. This is not a very scalable solution. So, the kind of problems that we have to deal with on a daily basis are kind of one of the reasons why we want to create these meetups, where we can actually discuss and share with you guys some of our experiences and actually maybe hear from you guys of what your ideas are on some of these problems. Ultimately we're all technology enthusiasts, and it's an interesting subject. We've got some other numbers in terms of what we're doing here at Agoda. Our pricing API is one of the key components. Basically where the customers will request, I need this many hotels in this city. The pricing API is doing 100,000 calls a second. So that's in each data center. So we have 5 data centers all going at 100,000 calls a second. And again, this kind of hints at the scale. In order to support that, that's running on a Cassandra cluster that is doing 60,000 inserts per second. So that's 2.5K per Hisa, which is a growth of 145 megabytes per second. It also decays at that rate as well, so we don't have to combat that. So that's a little bit it's a little bit who we are, right? So in terms of what we want to talk about, it really is just kind of shared experiences, right? Things that we've worked on, things that we find interesting, things that you know may also affect us all. You know, I think one of the things that we found with other meetups is that a lot of us are actually fighting the same kind of problems, right? So I think it's interesting to kind of discuss what solutions there are and how they work. Some of the technologies that have kind of been helpful to us in sort of the recent years, we've been investing pretty heavily into Cassandra, into Kafka, into Spark streaming, and there's some of the talks that we'll be doing over the next few months will sort of go into some detail as to how we've leveraged those technologies in order to create the environment and the stable as it is today. Now, in terms of you know these talks, I think it'll be more interesting if it's not only people from Agoda that are talking. So you know, I would invite anybody that actually wants to be talking. Please, you know, talk with us and you know say what you want. We'll try and make that happen. The idea is that we're going to create a dialogue, right? So for you guys to be also talking with us and we give something back, and that's really sort of why we're here, right? That you know that we're here in Bangkok, where we're employing a lot of people. We want to give something back to Bangkok and hopefully create you know some kind of interesting you know dialogue you know, where we can meet up, we can discuss these problems and you know create something cool. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That is what we are doing here. We are doing cool things. So, if anyone interested to working with Peter, just ask me. And the next session, here in Agoda, we have a big website. เรามีเว็บไซต์ที่ใหญ่มาก and we have a kind of interesting deployment technique. And today we have Gerald Dixon, the awesome. We have an interesting session. เรามีหัวข้อนะครับ Zero Downtime Deployment with ASP.NET from Gerald Dixon. Please.
So, welcome guys. Zero downtime deployment. So I'll just start with a little bit about myself. I'm one of the development managers at Agoda on the front end team. Previously I was working in Australia for a ticketing company named Ticket Solutions. And the technologies that we're working on were similar. At Agoda we're working on a .NET environment with our front end website, which is based on OpenStack Cloud. Where I was working previously, we were working on similar technologies but on the AWS cloud, and there's a lot of similarities between the two. I'm also a member of the NUnit open source project and an advocate of DevOps. So what I'm going to be talking about today is just an overview of the session, is just a little bit about what I mean by zero downtime. Some quick notes on databases, because database deployments can be a bit of a, you know, most websites do have a database behind them, so that's a key factor in being able to deploy your website, is what you do about the database. And then some specifics on ASP.NET websites and going into a bit on IIS. And putting it all together with a little demo at the end on delivering deployment. So what is zero downtime? The theory is minimizing downtime with an aim for zero. I mean, we aim for zero downtime. That isn't always possible. It depends on your company's requirements. They may be able to accept some form of downtime. At Agoda, they don't accept much downtime at all. So what is down? Down is offline. Also, any temporary loss of page functionality, reduced performance, long page load time. One of the most common issues that we have when deploying is NIAS is the work process recycling, which leads to long page load time. Who is this for? It's for environments that operate 24 hours a day, and also for environments that deploy frequently. For example, continuous delivery. And our end goal is basically to deploy frequently and automate as much as possible. Automation is one of the key things in this because you can do a lot of work to achieve zero downtime, but you've got to weigh up if it's worth it. So the more you can automate it, the more regularly you'll do it, and the less downtime you'll get. So a bit about some of the tools I'm going to be talking about today. I'm from Australia, so a lot of the tools that I use were made in Australia. Octopus Deploy, which was one that we use, we're just starting to use it now at Agoda, but we used it extensively at my previous company. Seek structured logging. If you haven't had a look at Seek, I recommend checking it out. It's a great data store for structured logging that allows you to, it's got a good queryable UI. And also, I'm going to talk a little bit about in some of the slides about AWS and Azure cloud platforms. I've got a preference for Azure, mainly because the tools are better for .NET developers, but at Agoda we aren't using either. At Agoda we've built our own cloud on top of OpenStack. So I'll just do a quick bit on database change. Changes are transactional, so they go in line with other transactions that are happening on the database. And if you follow a few simple rules, your database changes can be both backwards and forwards compatible. I've got a blog post that if any of you want to check this out, but basically at my last company we just used to deploy the database almost every day, just roll up all the new changes that we had and throw them out. The big things to watch out for are things like when you're modifying tables, always add columns and make them nullable. Don't delete or reorder columns, and they go in straight away. Don't add defaults to columns if you can avoid it when you're adding new ones, because that will do an insert on every row in the table. So have a preference for nullable columns. Avoid stored procedures where possible. Don't use them for CRUD-style simple operations. Stored procedures are good. Some people will tell you that there is a performance difference, and that's not really true. If you've got a simple select statement, if you put it in a parameterized query, it'll get cached in SQL the same as a stored procedure will. So there's actually no difference in performance in terms of caching the query plans. Unless you're building your strings dynamically, which is what I would try and avoid if you're putting your SQL statements in your code. Just have a set string, put parameters in it, and only change the parameters when you call it, and it will cache it with the query plan exactly the same as it would a stored procedure. Always add new proc parameters with a default. So if you are using stored procs, you add a new parameter, put a default in it, and then both versions will be able to call the proc without erroring. Don't reorder or delete columns from procs or views, just add new ones. And again, it'll maintain backwards and forwards compatibility. A few more things to make them forwards compatible. If you have a read of the blog post, it's got the full details, but one is if you are adding defaults to a stored proc, and it's called from both the old and new versions, and you're doing an update statement, there's a little gotcha with the old version overriding the new version's data, but I won't go too much into that today because I mainly want to talk about websites.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can't hear you at the back.
Really?
So you want to shout to use the mic.
All right, I'll get louder. So website deployments. No, I don't. Okay. So there's a few different styles of website deployments. Sorry, have you got?
You were saying that updates to the schema in SQL Server are transactional. Is that correct? You can roll back a DDL change to a SQL database change?
If you're doing updates to, most changes in SQL are transactional, so they'll go in a transaction that if it fails will roll back itself.
Even the DDL changes? I wasn't aware that Microsoft
Adding a
SQL
column.
Server supported that.
Adding a column, yeah, I'm mainly,
I believe index changes and column changes are not.
yeah, you're right there with indexes and column changes. But they will go in a transaction, so you won't get like a partially complete
Correct.
add
It's consistent.
between. It's consistent.
Consistent.
Yeah. So website deployments. The first style of I'm going to go through a few high level styles of deployment and talk about how that I've used them in the past. So the first style of deployment is canary deployment. This is where you deploy your code to a single server in your environment first, and then run tests and so forth on that. Sometimes people do this with a live server, e.g. if you've got a cluster of servers, deploy to one server first, see if there's any issues, if there's not, roll out to the rest. Applying live traffic in a canary deployment style is a little bit risky, but I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. Rolling deployments. So this one's pretty common with a lot of the companies I've worked for in the past. It basically, in this scenario, is where we deploy to a single server in your scale group or cluster one at a time. As each server is deployed, you can do things like take it offline, off the load balancer, deploy the software to it, run any smoke tests or regression tests that you want on it. And then most of this can and should be managed from your deployment tool or load balancer, or a combination of the both. So blue-green deployments is what we use in a lot of cloud platforms a lot. So it consists of running two production environments, one blue and one green, only one with active traffic, and you deploy to the other environment and then cut over between them. This allows for easy rollbacks, but it's expensive to run two copies of production usually. In AWS, if any of you have used Elastic Beanstalk, it does this out of the box. So basically, Elastic Beanstalk will run up an entire new environment with your CloudFormation template and then do a DNS cutover between the two. It's quite nice. And Azure Web Apps does a similar thing with its cutover between environments, but it uses a load balancer cutover. So IIS specific techniques. So one of the things that I want to talk about is how some of this technology works under the bonnet. With IIS, one of the ways that that I deploy websites traditionally is basically with a file path swap. So you copy the new files to a new folder on the system, swap the path of the website in IIS. This allows for a clean cutover, and the worker process will actually finish transactions that are open or threads that are open on the old code and start new threads on the new code at the instant that you cut the file path over. So it's nice and clean. The swap on the load balancer, this is a technique that can be combined with it. Basically, as we were talking about with rolling deployments before, you can take things on and off the load balancer. But it's got similar issues. Basically, if you are deploying a new website, you are going to have the time that it takes when new traffic's first hitting the site for it to warm up. So this is where heartbeat and health check URLs come in. Most load balancers support a health check URL. How I would recommend implementing this is having some sort of health check that combines with your application staff to help you do things like pre-caching or prefetching of cache. One of the methods that I've used in the past is basically by default your health check URL returns a 500 error. So the load balancer will, when a website comes online, load balancer will never immediately send a traffic. And then after you've done your startup, pre-warm and whatnot, then set a variable or something that will then make that return 200, and then the load balancer will start passing traffic to it. Some people do this, or the health check URL with the deployment tools. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend doing it inside the C# code and using like a static variable or something to flick it on and off. The reason for that is it'll give you more of a consistent development experience between your local and live. also it gets developers a little bit more involved in the production environment. So pre-warm without heartbeat or health check. So App Init, if you're not running a high volume site, I recommend checking out App Init. It came out with IIS 7.0 as an add-on. It's been built into 7.5. It basically allows you to IIS the pre-warm itself. So you don't have to have any scripts that hit your website from somewhere to pre-warm it. And I've got a blog post on that as well. It's pretty cool. Basically, it doesn't matter what happens to your site, it will bring itself up again. Okay, but if you're using a load balancer, you've probably got a health check URL that you can use anyway, so it's a bit redundant unless you've got something that's pretty low volume. So putting it together, so just over the basics again, combining the swap file path and the swap on the load balancer. Basically, with your deployment tool, if we look at a rolling deployment scenario, taking a server off the load balancer, deploying the website to it, cutting the file path in IIS, and then moving the server back onto the load balancer. So if you follow that style of deployment, like I said, as soon as the server comes back online with the load balancer, it'll start hitting your health check URL, and your pre-warm scripts will start, and then once they're finished, your health check URL goes 200, and then the load balancer starts sending traffic to it when the website's ready. So that's how we usually do it. Yeah, one other thing is though, sometimes if your health check, if your startup and pre-fetching of your cache takes a long time, some of the companies that I've worked with in the past, some of their pre-fetching used to take 2 or 3 minutes. You might want to do something like hit your health check URL from your deployment tool and wait at deployment stage before it returns a 200 before you get the load balancer to flick it over. Because if I've seen scenarios in the past where we've done a rolling deployment and we took a large amount of servers offline because they were all waiting for pre-fetching. Things to watch out for. So one of the biggest issues that we have with this kind of deployment style is users in progress while we're switching. So if we're doing a deployment to a rolling deployment or a canary deployment, you're going to have 2 versions in live at the same time, and you may have issues between compatibility between those 2 versions. This is especially common with AJAX calls. So, your client may get version 1.1 of your website, and then as you're doing a rolling deployment, version 1.2 is now live, and you've got JavaScript from 1.1 calling, doing callbacks to 1.2, and is that compatible? So my recommendations on that is that there's no silver bullet here. I mean, it's an issue that a lot of companies have. There is some things you can do to mitigate it. One of the things that I definitely recommend is doing code reviews and making this a part of your code review process, is reminding people to check for backwards compatibility with the change. In terms of backwards compatibility, view models help because it helps people understand what's actually going on in the UI, but from a programming perspective. Sending your JavaScript to the CDN and versioning it or hashing it so that both versions are available at the same time. Some issues I've seen some people run into is that one version was getting the new version's JavaScript code and it was a bit of a mess. So if you are ending up with multiple versions running as you're cutting over or deploying, the best thing is to have both versions available on your CDN or wherever you're storing your static content at the same time so that you can support that. And designing your API calls to be backwards compatible. Only creating new methods, don't do things like add parameters to existing methods. One of the design patterns that I've seen is one of the companies I was working with, all of their methods only had one parameter, which was, say for example, the method's called myMethod. It would have a single parameter, which is myMethodRequest. And then they would just build on the single object, which is one way you can do it. Sticky sessions aren't the solution. If you're having trouble with the backwards and forwards compatibility of your website, sticky sessions may help you out, but I don't don't recommend using them long term because your developers will get used to users only being on a single node, and they'll start to design for that, which is in the long run bad for your redundancy. And DNS cutover helps. If you're using AWS, it's pretty easy. Route 53 in AWS is really cool with some of these features it's got for supporting DNS cutover. There is some issues with DNS cutover though. It's a little bit slower. You can't get as fast reaction time as you can with a load balancer cutover. So, and the other issues that I've had with DNS cutover is some ISPs force up the TTLs on DNS records. So when your users are looking up your DNS records, they're not hitting your DNS server, they're hitting their ISP's DNS server, and we don't have any control over the ISP's DNS server. So if they're doing naughty things like increasing the TTL to save load on their DNS servers, you may run into users that instead of the 1 or 5 minutes or whatever you've set your TTLs to, they might get a 2-hour TTL and be hitting an old environment. So yeah, the DNS cutover is pretty cool. DNS cutover does solve some of the problems though with the consistency between versions, because if you're doing something like Elastic Beanstalk and you've got an entire new environment run up, if the user gets the DNS record for the new environment, they're going to have that DNS record for a period and they'll stay on the one environment as opposed to flicking between environments like you would have with a rolling deployment behind a load balancer. So combining the styles. So one of the things that we used to use at my last company that we found was pretty successful is what I call a 110-100 deployment, which is a hybrid of all three of these styles. So what we basically do is the theory behind it is you have a 1% environment, which is normally like a pre-production environment. Sometimes it'll be something that only internal users can access or something like that. So you can get a version into live, run integration tests on it as a part of your deployment process. And then a 10% environment, which is the next one that you go to after everything passes in the 1%. Which is a subset of live traffic, like a single server in your cluster, or a single cluster if you've got multiple clusters. And then you can run smoke tests on this. You can send live traffic to it and monitor your logs and whatnot. And then the 100% environment. So if everything's okay in the first two, the next level you go to is deploying to everything. This is just a theory or a general practice. You know, it doesn't have to be 1%, 10%, 100%. It could be any percentages that you want. And there doesn't have to be 3. You could have lots more stages depending on what your requirements are. The 110-100 is just a rough guide. And the key to making it work is getting the automation in. So 110-100 in practice. So this is a bit of an overview of what we used to do. So we would deploy to our 1% environment, which was our pre-production. This environment was only accessible via our internal traffic. So it allowed us to run integration tests on a copy of our website in live and verify that everything was working. This was pretty important because you can run integration tests in your QA environment, but generally your web configuration, things like app settings, connection strings can be different between that and live. So I think it's very important to have that first step in live that you can run your integration tests on to verify that your configuration data is all kosher. So the 10% environment, we used to use a single server on our live scaling group. So one of our servers would be elected as a canary. We would deploy a version to that, and we would monitor our logging system for 5 minutes for thresholds. So examples of some of the thresholds that we used to monitor for was how many HTTP 500 errors are we getting. Now, we wouldn't look for 0 because we used to get HTTP 500 errors from things like bots, hackers, all sorts of things. So we would just look for a threshold. We'd know our average for the day would be this amount. And if in a 5-minute window it didn't exceed that threshold, we would think it would be okay. The other thing that we used to look for, which Seek's got a really handy feature for, which I'll talk about later, is new exceptions. So Seek's got an easy query you can run to look for a exception that you haven't seen before. And the other thing that we used to look for was if the number of exceptions in our log database didn't increase from an average. So, you know, in the last day, our average was this many exceptions per 5-minute period, so that doesn't increase more than B% or something like that. And then basically, if we'd leave the environment running on that single server for about 5 minutes, and then if all those thresholds were okay, we would then roll out the software to the rest of the scaling group. But if it exceeded those thresholds, we'd immediately roll back and then email someone in our system admin department to go, hey, it exceeded this threshold. So yeah, and then if everything passed, we'd let, yeah.
Are you running microservices where you have dedicated databases for your servers? And if not, how do you do this 10% thing if you have a database schema change?
We would apply the database changes ahead of time. So this is just the website.
Okay, so, right, so you don't do 1, 10, 100 for a database change?
No, this is just the website.
All your database changes have to be backwards compatible?
Yeah, we just do them all backwards and forwards compatible, so we could run, and that's the other thing as well, they have to be forwards compatible too, because if you're running a single version or both versions at the same time, it needs to be able to work with both while you're doing the canary. Yeah, so I'm going to do a short demo, and I hope nothing goes wrong, but things always do in a live demo, so bear with me. So in the demo, what I'm going to look at is the 110-100 deployment style. Basically, like I said, the key to getting this working is automation, and automation can be easy. I whipped up some PowerShell script to put in this deployment that was pretty easy to put together. And to try and give a demonstration of this automated failback. So I've got pre-baked blue and green environments. So so generally what we used to do was we would start to spin up new servers in our environment as a part of the cloud, our CloudFormation scripts. But I'm not going to do that today. I've just got 2 environments. So deploying using Octopus, I'm going to just go through the 10-100 scenario. So deploy to a single server, monitor for exceptions, roll back if it exceeds the threshold, and roll forward if it doesn't. So I've got the applications logging to an Octopus monitoring exceptions from a seed server, and I'm going to deploy a working package and then deploy a package that immediately fails, and we'll call it an automated rollback. So basically, it's a blue-green style deployment. We deploy the new version of the green environment, cut over a single canary so we can start getting traffic on the new version and see if it works. Monitor the seek database for logs, for exceptions, and then if it fails, roll it back to the blue version. If it succeeds, cut over to the green version. So, so I've got my 2 servers set up, or 4 servers set up behind. I'm just using an ARR load balancer. You could use, you know, anything as your load balancer, Nginx, F5. If you're using any of the, yeah, I don't think it's going to get any better than that. If you're using any hardware load balancers, they've generally got an API that you can call from your deployment tool to help automate things. Okay, so which one's active? So this is Octopus. I've got my. Did many people here use Octopus? Just a couple. Yeah. Pom uses it. Pom used to work for me. A disclaimer there. So yeah, and on that point of mixing this with cloud deployments, Pom has some great presentation that he did before on combining Octopus with ARM templates in Azure to spin up your infrastructure. So I recommend checking that out. So now, so I've got my two environments. I've got a Agoda 101 blue and a Agoda 101 green. The load balancer is in each environment with a tentacle on it. So at the moment, what I'm doing with this particular cutover is just running PowerShell scripts using an agent on the load balancer. Again, you know, you can also put with Octopus agents on Linux boxes if you're using something like Nginx, or if you're using a hardware load balancer, like I said, you can use the API. And then I've got the two servers in each environment. So blue, green. So green's my active environment at the moment. And I've got a little tool that generates traffic. So I can go in and have a look. Oh, no, I've locked up. Something always goes wrong with live demos. Okay, try and restart that. Alright, so my green environment's active, it's getting about 30 requests a second from my little traffic generation console app. So what I'll do is, so green was active, so I'll get my latest version here and I'll deploy that to the blue environment, which is inactive. So it's going to copy up the script there, and this is the working one. So what it's going to do, just go through that. So it's brought one of the servers online after deploying the software to it, and it's sitting there waiting for a minute, and then after it leaves the software for a minute, the live traffic's hitting it, so we can see the live traffic still going. It'll then check the seek server. It does a REST call to the seek server to check the logs. Seek is pretty cool, like I was saying. So we just do a web request from the PowerShell script, which then has pre-baked things in it like version and application name to check if there's anything wrong. Yeah, so I'm filtering for that application, the new version that I'm deploying, if there's any errors, and it's returning nothing. So the deployment tool should do the same thing. And yeah, and so the deployment tools said everything's okay, and it's cut off the green environment and cut over the blue environment. So yeah, and this is the query it was running against the seek server. Just open up. So you can see it's returned no events. So the next thing I'm going to do is introduce a new version that has a problem.
Joel,
Yep.
would you reduce your resolution?
Reduce my resolution.
Yeah, 1024.
Yeah. Do you think that'll help?
Yes.
I don't know how I'll go with that low resolution, but I'll try. Where is it? Where is it?
Oh,
Advanced.
yeah.
always go wrong.
Okay, โทษทีเกิดอุบัติเหตุนิดนึง For the accident, anyone have question between the waiting projector reboot? No question. We have a good shirt. This we can provide for the questioner. ใครถามเลยครับถาม ใครมีคำถามถูกใจสปีกเกอร์เราเดี๋ยวเราแจกเสื้อ
Beautiful shirt, folks.
Yes ก็ได้ยินไหมครับ ใครตามทันตามไม่ทันไหมครับ อยากให้ผมบีฟให้ไหมว่าเขากำลังทำอะไรอยู่ ไม่มีทุกคนตามทัน
ช่วงที่สวิตช์อ่ะอ่านภาษาอังกฤษไม่ได้ไงไม่เคยช่วงที่มันสวิตช์อ่ะเซสชั่นเก่าทำไงบนโปรดักชั่น
Session.
อันนี้สั้นๆครับสั้นง่ายๆ is our website has no session we didn't use session we are sessionless that's why it's very easy to switch between the new version the old version or if you go back we can go back if we can go we go yes we no session
อ๋อ
yeah we sessionless I said we stateless so
Yeah, dealing with session state should be not too hard though. I mean, it's just another database that you have to deal with. What I'd recommend doing is between versions, making like having one object that you store in session, the user's session, and making sure that's backwards and forwards compatible between versions. And then having your session state, like if you're using something like a cloud formation template to deploy your environment, put your Redis cluster or whatever it is outside of your standard template. So that way when you're deploying a new web cluster, both versions are using the same database for session. Yeah.
ก็บอกถ้าอยากใช้เซสชันเราก็จะต้องมีการสร้างเซสชันคีย์แล้วแต่ละเวอร์ชันก็ใช้เซสชันคีย์ที่แยกกันต่อแล้วทีนี้เวลาสวิตช์มันก็จะใช้เซสชันคีย์ของมัน
So I'm just going to push another version through. So this application I've created, it's got a web config setting that will make it randomly throw an exception. So I'm just going to push another version through and then deploy that, which will randomly throw an error and cause it to automatically fall back during the deployment. So we should see my little console app start to return exceptions because the page will be throwing a 500 error, and the deployment tool will leave it there for a minute, check the logs, and then see that there's throwing exceptions and automatically roll it back. So here we go, we've got exceptions coming through. And so the main point behind this is that automation in this type of process is not hard to do. The last thing you want is people sitting around at your company watching, you know, charts and error logs and things like that, waiting for something to go wrong. If you can automate that into your deployment tool, the deployments become fire and forget. They become a no-brainer, a non-event. So you can just press deploy, walk away, go make a coffee. You know, not have to worry about it. And know that you've got the automation in place to, if you've just deployed something that explodes, it will roll it back for you, you know, and send you an email. Yep, here we go. So it's exploded, and it's rolled the environment back. I'm now getting OK errors. There's no more exceptions because the deployment tool has gone, yep, it's exploded, and it's told the load balancer to move everything back to the green environment. And on top of that, it's also sent me a little notification in Slack to say, hey, your deploy has failed, which is great because I can check Slack on my phone. So if I've done something like gone to lunch while I press deploy, it'll let me know on my phone when I'm at lunch. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. We're going to upload all of the example code for this and the presentation to GitHub after the conference and email it around if anyone's interested in the source code specifics. So I guess I'll go back to yeah, if there's any questions. Has anyone got any questions?
มีคำถามไหมครับ
Yeah.
มีนะ
When you run the both the old version and the new version on the both server,
Yep.
what is mechanism or idea you design to disconnect the traffic to the old one?
In this demo, I'm using ARR, just the ARR load balancer in IIS.
So
I
you
wouldn't
check the session, something like that.
change the what?
Check the session, the number of session, something like that.
Number of sessions. No, well, it's just at the load balancer level. So it's cut over at that, and it's just a weighted round robin load balancer. So we'll just evenly distribute the traffic amongst the active nodes. And one of those nodes becomes the new green environment that it started deploying to. And yeah, it'll just balance between them using ARR. Yep.
Can I have two share, please?
Yes, one question.
One question. You got one, I will accept you later.
Yep.
If the release have something to do with the database, how do you engage with it for the rollback?
With the database, I recommend doing your changes backwards and forwards compatible and just doing them ahead of time. So if you're doing something like adding a new column, add it, make it nullable. If you're adding stored procedures, you know, only add new parameters and give them a default, things like that. And just, yeah, I've got a blog post which is in here about incremental backwards and forwards compatibility and incremental database change. I recommend having a look at because with your database, it's quite easy to make it backwards and forwards compatible if you do your SQL good. Anyone else?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
what environments do you filter before reaching that point before you deploy?
Before we deploy to live, generally like at Agoda or in my experience?
At Agoda.
at Agoda. At Agoda, we've got a development environment, a QA environment, a pre-production environment, and then a production environment. Yeah.
110, right?
Yeah, almost. Yeah. Yeah, we're doing something similar at Agoda, but we're still working on a lot of the automation at the moment. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of a lot of the stuff I'm talking about today is some of the stuff that we're working on right now at Agoda. Yeah.
For all of this, do you have any problem with this zero downtime deployments, and do you have any improvement plan in the future? I mean,
the biggest issue that we have is what I was talking about before with having two versions running at the same time, and things like, especially if it's mid-cutover, so things like AJAX calls coming from like a user getting version 1.1, and then we cut over to 1.2, and then they're making AJAX callbacks to the server with the different versions of the code. And it's not you would think it wouldn't be a huge thing, but because of the volume of users that we have active on the website at the one time, it's it can become quite a large problem. So yeah, it's just code reviews is something we're starting to get really big on at Agoda. And like I was saying, I think that's the best way to solve it is in terms of backwards and forwards compatibility is getting peer code reviews and getting people double check your code. Because sometimes you forget about things like that, and if you've got someone else that's looking at your code and having another set of eyes on your code before it gets merged into master, I think that's the best way to tackle it. Yeah.
At Agoda, how many times do you do deployments?
The front end team that I'm on, we do 2 deployments a day right now, and we'd like to get to about 20 deployments per day. So yeah, it's that's why we need to. Yeah, these guys are from Agoda that are laughing. So yeah, they think it's very scary for 20 deployments a day, but I think we'll get there. We just need more automation.
So probably it's also including the rush hour. I mean, 20 deployments a day.
In what? Sorry.
Busy hours.
Busy hours. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to give you a bit of a background, when I first started working for Ticket Solutions, which was about 10 years ago, when we did live deployments, we used to put up maintenance pages. We used to do it after hours. Tom will remember some of this. And yeah, we knew we got to a good place with our deployments when we said we preferred deploying during business hours, when that was our preference, because that's when you know you're at a point where you can do deployments that aren't going to upset users. Yeah, and so at Agoda, we deploy twice a day during business hours, and we're at a point with our deployments where it doesn't affect the live traffic when we deploy things. So it's a good position to be in. And like I was saying, with the rolling deployments, if you start implementing something like that, where you can take a single node in your cluster offline, deploy to it, pre-warm it, bring it back on, you can do your deployments slowly and have less impact from things like worker processes recycling and your prefetching and things like that. And it's, with a little bit of PowerShell and the right deployment tool, it's easy to bake into your deployment process. So it's just push a button and go have a coffee. Why do you guys laugh?
I'd like to add a little bit on that, and also from Agoda. When you have such traffic like we have, large volume at especially business hour, when you deploy something, you have a system that can look at the quality of your deployment. With more traffic, you get instantly the problem coming in. If you deploy 3 AM when you have one customer, you might get the error like 3 hours later when there's nobody else at the office. So doing at business hours is actually even better for a bigger website.
Any questions?
So you said you're planning like 20 deployments a day, right? I'm wondering like how long does it take from when a developer commits code to when it's gonna go live on the server, and like what's your branching strategies?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say because we've got so many different teams at Agoda. Even on the front end team that I'm in, we've got separate sub teams in that. Like Cedric, he works on the booking form side. My team works on the NHA stuff. So it's we don't have a single strategy that's company wide. We generally work on both. Like most of the teams work on things like Git flow and GitHub flow, the two main ones that we're using in terms of branching strategy at the moment. In terms of changes when developers are finished to when changes go live, like I said, we do 2 deploys a day. So if you're finished code in the morning, you can generally go in the afternoon's package or something like that. So generally things go live. If you get them done in the morning, they'll go live in the afternoon. If you get them done in the afternoon, they'll go live the next morning. So it's most of the time it's like that.
So when you say done, you mean QA done?
Yes, QA done. Yeah, so we do have our developers do have to get code checked by QAs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any experience on rollback version? And what kind of the issue you found on that?
Rollback experience.
And how do you deal with that?
Rolling back what, a website?
Yeah, and some data interface already has been modified to the correct one.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of data corruption, that's pretty hard. I mean, yeah, like I'd be doing stuff like, when I have faced issues with that in the past, it's generally been a process of restoring a backup of the database to another server or something like that. If you're doing things like some companies that I used to work for, they did things like 30-minute log shipping of their SQL databases. So they had a copy they could go back to that was 30 minutes out of date to deal with some things like that, which was quite handy. But in terms of websites, if you're using something like blue-green deployment, you've got an environment ready that you can roll back to. So that's why I recommend using something like that. And if you're in Azure or AWS, it's a no-brainer because to run up another copy in their production environment when you're paying by the hour for servers it's nothing. Yeah. Cool. Well, unless there's any other questions, I think I'm out of time, aren't I, Matt?
Yeah. I believe we are run out of time for the first session.
Yeah.
โอเคก็เดี๋ยวเราพักกันสักครู่หนึ่งนะครับก็เบรกมีเครื่องดื่มมีขนมด้านหน้านะครับก็สักประมาณ15 นาทีใครที่ยังสนใจอยากจะคุยอยากจะถามนะครับมาด้านหน้ามาคุยกันได้นะครับเราค่อนข้างจะเน้นพอสมควรนะครับ
อยากคุยเรื่องโลแบ็กเดี๋ยวเราคุยข้างนอกเรามีประสบการณ์เยอะมากเรื่องโลแบ็ก
ถามอะไรไม่ถามเรื่องของมันสำหรับใครที่อยากจะรู้เรื่องของที่ว่าเราเรียกว่าอะไรเนี่ยเมื่อกี้ถามเรื่อง code to deploy ใช่ไหมลองถามพี่นนท์ครับว่าโลกาMy Idol ครับ
My Idol